All right, well, like Rad said, my name is Drew. I'm Jamaican. I love playing volleyball, and I'm an avid listener to public radio. So, why did I share all of that with you? Well, because I know how these events can get. I want you all to feel comfortable, because really, that's what labels do. They make us feel comfortable. I mean, if you think about all of the random information that we're bombarded with every day, labels help us keep all of that stuff sorted into nice, neat, familiar little categories. You ever wondered why it is that we process information like this? I don't know either, but I have a theory. My theory is that way back when our ancestors' mind grapes were just about to get ripe, they figured out that their survival was based on how well they labeled. So think about this. Some enterprising young Homo sapien is figuring, well, if I'm going to survive to pass on my genes, I'm going to have to figure out the difference between the things that I eat, the things that I run away from, and the things that I, if he's smart, obey. So think about where we're at right now. The environment that we live in right now is vastly different in most ways, but we still have this ability, this tendency to look at a population of things, pick out the similarities, group them together, and smack a label on them. So you might be thinking, well, if that's such an integral part of who we are as thinking human beings, then what's the big problem? All right, so you remember when I said that labels make us feel comfortable? So what happens when you get a little too comfortable? You get lazy. So we have this tendency where once we've labeled something, we think that that's all there is to it, that there's no more thinking needed, there's no more processing of information that needs to go on. And invariably what happens is that our labels do the thinking for us. So the labels tell us what to eat, what to wear, what group we belong in, how to treat each other, et cetera, et cetera. And what's even worse is that our labels tell us how we're supposed to solve our problems. Now, the reason why that's a problem is the fact that, I don't know if you've watched the news lately, the problems we're dealing with today are not your grandfather's problems. They are larger in scope, more complex than anything we've ever had to deal with before. So we can't afford to get stuck. We can't afford to allow ourselves to narrow the way we think. So that is why I'm suggesting a very, very simple idea, is that we play with our labels. Excuse me. So realize that our reality is elastic. So why not our labels? Really what it comes down to is, think about this. It comes down to one fundamentally important question. When you're faced with that problem that you just can't seem to overcome, ask yourself, what would MacGyver do? Seriously, I mean, because this guy, reality is like silly putty to this guy. I mean, he doesn't see a stapler and paper clips and duct tape. He sees a lawnmower in the making, you know, so there's a lot we can learn from him, but I know what you're thinking. I know you're saying, I can't be like MacGyver. I'm not as smart as he is. I don't know about physics. I don't have the right kind of hair. So it's not that hard if you just start off with 3 easy little principles. So first up, remove the labels. So just completely divorce yourself of any preconceived notions that you might have had. So this is a painting. If you can't read French, it says, this is not a pipe. So when I tell you this is not a pipe, what's the first question that comes to mind? Well, then what is it? See how easy that was? Immediately your brain is woken up. You're beginning to exercise that, and you're beginning to shake off those narrow categories that you're used to. So think about it. 20 years ago, if I asked you, could you take a picture of me with your cell phone? You'd have looked at me like, are you crazy? Phones are for calling, cameras are for picture taking. But now we take more pictures with our cell phones than we do with actual cameras. So 20 years ago, that was a stupid question. But that's the beauty of removing labels, is that when there are no labels, when there are no preconceived notions, there are no stupid questions. And so when you're not afraid of asking the stupid questions, you're ready for the second principle. So let's try it out. This is not a waffle iron. So your question is, well, what is it? Well, would you be surprised if I told you that this is a machine to be used for prototyping sneakers? If you are not surprised by that, then you probably already know this, but this is how Nike came up with their first US designed sneaker, and it was actually called the waffle sole. So what they did was they removed the already label that everybody, the literal label on the box, and they replaced it with their own label. So to illustrate this point, I'm going to tell you a little story about a guy named Craig. Craig is somebody that a couple years ago, the society would have labeled him as misfit. He had all the trappings. He dropped out of high school. He spent most of his life in juvenile detention centers. He had no family support unit, working dead-end jobs. I mean, he was a classic case. Until One day he auditioned for a play being put on by a local nonprofit called AWOL, and you'll hear from them a little bit later. So he auditioned for this play, and now what was happening? He's having to memorize lines, he's having to show up on time to rehearsals, he's having to learn stage movement and choreography. In other words, this isn't Craig the misfit, this is Craig the actor. And so now he's being treated like Craig the actor, not based on the label that society had given him. And so what happened? His life did a 180. He's finished, he got his GED, he's now in college. I mean, he's met the mayor. I haven't met the mayor. And he now has that family support unit. Not because somebody gave him a copy of The Secret and said, you know, think good thoughts. No, because someone decided that he is someone that has something to contribute, and they refuse to let themselves be dictated to based on a label that someone else gave him. Now that might be all well and inspiring and everything, but sometimes one label isn't enough. So that brings us to the third principle, which is remixing your labels. So this is actually my favorite part, because mixing labels is what I do for a living. So don't tell my mother this. When I was growing up, I really hated classrooms. I loved learning, hated classrooms. What I loved was playing video games. So what would happen if you mixed the idea of classrooms with video games? Well, a professor at Indiana University tried it, and he's got kids earning experience points rather than grades. And they're going on quests instead of turning in assignments. In other words, he's taking something that most people would see as a horrible experience that they would never like, and turning it into an engaging learning experience. So speaking of things that people don't like, stairs. Am I right? Stairs? Anybody with me? People don't like stairs. But what people do like is making noise. So what if you could rig your stairs to make noise? Well, VW tried it, and they got 66% more people to use the stairs than the escalator right next to it. Not by preaching at them, not by telling them all the dangers of being fat and lazy. No, by harnessing the power of people's desire to be obnoxious. So, speaking of obnoxious people, is there anything we hate more than obnoxious people? Yeah, you're thinking the same thing, paying your light bill. Everybody hates it. So what if we could get obnoxious people to pay our light bill? Well, there's a nightclub in the Netherlands that figured out they've rigged their dance floor so that the more people dance, the more electricity is generated that powers the lights on the dance floor. I mean, it gives a whole new meaning to the phrase electric slide. So I was thinking, all of these examples are inspiring, and I thought, well, what is something simple that I could use in my own context, in my, using the principles of remove, replace, remix. And so this is something I pass almost every day. These are the walls that are surrounding the parking lot at the Civic Center here in Savannah. And they're walls, and to me they look kind of dingy and grungy and ugly, but to the city's defense, it's probably time consuming and costly to keep these things clean. But it's a wall. A wall is a wall, it's doing its job. But what if it wasn't a wall? I mean, what if it was a canvas? I mean, throw a mural up there. Well, what if it was a gallery? You get a bunch of local artists and you rotate the artwork out like a gallery. Better yet, what if it was a clock? I haven't really thought that through yet, but I mean, something to do with like the shadow, time, sundial, I don't know. That's not the point. The point is that we're looking at this in a different way. I'm refusing to look at this just based on the label that society told me, that I'm familiar with, that I grew up with. So this is not a wall, just as much as this is not a waffle iron, just as much as this is not a pipe, and as evident as just as much as I'm not a public speaker, which begs the question then, what am I? Well, I'm out of time. Thank you.